Good afternoon. My informative speech is going to be on Ulysses S. Grant. He's actually a relative of mine. He's my ninth cousin. Pretty proud of this guy, pretty proud of my connection with him as president and as a general who fought, actually led fighting forces in the Civil War. So here's some things that maybe you didn't know about him. So first of all, he was one of the most influential Americans of the 19th century. He led the Union Army to victory during the Civil War and then helped steer the nation through the Reconstruction during 2 terms of presidency. The S in Grant's name actually didn't stand for anything. He was always known as Ulysses as a youth in Ohio, but his name is actually Hiram Ulysses Grant. His phantom middle initial is a result of an error from a congressman in Ohio named Thomas Hamer. He accidentally wrote the future general's name as Ulysses S. Grant when he nominated to attend West Point. Despite Grant's best efforts to correct the record, the name stuck, and he eventually accepted it as his own. He was notoriously unlucky in business. He resigned his post after a very successful term in the military in 1854 and spent the next 7 years as a farmer, real estate agent, and rent collector. He was so unsuccessful in life as a businessman, he had to resort to selling firewood at some point. While in St. Louis, when the Civil War erupted, he was toiling away at his family's Galena leather business. At his family's Galena, Illinois leather business. He started with his son a financial firm, and a man named Ferdinand Ward was his partner, but it went belly up. And by 1884, Grant was bankrupt. Grant won the first major Union victory of the Civil War. I didn't know that. He struggled to secure a field command at the outbreak of the Civil War, but was later placed in charge of a regiment of Illinois volunteers and quickly promoted to the rank of brigadier general. He's very aggressive, and the first time that we saw this was in February of 1862, when he forced the capitulation of some 15,000 Confederates at Tennessee's Fort Donelson. He famously warned the garrison's commander that no terms except complete and unconditional surrender would be accepted. He struggled with alcohol throughout his life. He was a notorious alcoholic, and actually a notorious womanizer. Not exactly very proud of that, but you got to take the good with the bad. It became problematic, his alcoholism, in the early 1850s when he was reportedly forced to resign from the Army because he was caught drunk on duty. He swore off alcohol for the next 10 years, but would only fall off the wagon after the Civil War. Grant hated wearing Army uniforms, and he was actually constantly disciplined because of this. He was supposed to be at the theater with Lincoln on the night of his assassination. Grant was invited to join Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater on that evening, but he had to decline after him and his wife made plans to visit their children in New Jersey. Lucky for him. Grant later described Lincoln's death as the darkest day of his life. Grant prevented Robert E. Lee from being charged with treason after the Civil War. Fun fact, I am married to my soulmate, whose family is actually a direct descendant of Robert E. Lee. When he accepted the surrender of Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia in April '65, Grant offered generous terms that paroled Confederate soldiers and officers and allowed them to return to their homes. He even permitted the men to keep their horses and mules for use as farm animals. His memoirs were later published by Mark Twain. Let's talk a little bit about his presidency. As a war hero, it was pretty much foregone conclusion. It was pretty easy for him to get to the presidency. He was appointed to the as a first four-star general. He was appointed America's first four-star general, The president removed a vocal critic of his policy, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, once he became president, from the cabinet, replaced him with scratch that. Ulysses S. Grant entered the White House in the middle of the Reconstruction era, which was a very tumultuous period in which the 11 southern states that seceded before were brought back into the Union. As president, Grant tried to foster a peaceful reconciliation between the North and South. So the Reconstruction pretty much dominated most of his presidency. He was involved, or somewhat thought of as being involved in numerous scandals and corruption. During his first term, a group of speculators led by James Fisk and Jay Gould attempted to influence the government and manipulate the gold market. And that failed attempt actually led to the financial panic of September 24, 1869. Whether good or bad, Ulysses S. Grant did many good things for this country, for the defeat of the Confederate states. But he also had and used his national bond with those Southern citizens. I mean, he knew, even today we know, if you take desperate people's resources away, they're just going to become more desperate. So, by the same token, he gave those Southern states dignity. Whether or not they deserved it is up to debate. However, we are where we are, and he became president for it, two-term president. He left the White House in March of 1877, and he took a trip around the world. He bought a brownstone in New York City's Upper East Side in 1881. He decided to write his memoirs in late 1884, and that was the same year he was diagnosed with throat cancer. He died at the age of 63 on July 23, 1885 in New York City. Mount McGregor, New York. His funeral was attended by more than 1 million New York City citizens, and he is currently laid to rest in a tomb in the New York City Riverside Park. So that's a little bit about 9 minutes worth fun facts about Ulysses S. Grant, my cousin. I hope that you learned a little something, and thank you for your time.